University's online Laurentian lecture series. My name is Kim Hisong, and I'm the Executive Director of Annual Giving and Laurentian Engagement here at St. Lawrence, and I will help to moderate tonight's lecture. I'd like to just cover a few technical items before we begin. Just a few tips about the webinar audio. If you're using the audio through your computer, please know that you must have a built-in microphone or an external microphone in order to ask a question. Otherwise, you will be able to hear us, but we won't be able to hear you. If you're using your telephone audio, if you have your phone on speaker, in order for us to hear your question, you will likely need to take the speaker off during that time and use your handset. We recommend that during the presentation you minimize the navigation pane in your upper right-hand corner by using the orange arrow near the top to minimize the pane. And if you need to maximize the pane to ask a question, simply use the orange arrow to maximize it once again. All participants will be muted during the lecture, and at the end we will invite comments and questions. And at that time you'll be able to virtually raise your hand using the hand icon on the side of your navigation pane. The icon is a small hand in blue towards the bottom. You click it once to raise your hand, and when you're called on, you will be unmuted to ask your question. So without further delay, I am pleased to introduce our lecturer for the evening, Anne-Marie Gardenier-Halstead, Associate Professor and Co-Chair of the Performance and Communication Arts Department here at St. Lawrence University. Anne-Marie has an MFA in Theater Pedagogy Directing from Virginia Commonwealth University and a BA in English Secondary Education from Lemoyne College. Anne-Marie teaches acting, directing, children's theater, theater for social change, and rhetoric and public speaking, and regularly directs main stage productions here at SLU. Prior to teaching at St. Lawrence, Anne-Marie taught at Laramie County Community College in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and at East Syracuse Manoa High School in Syracuse, New York. When she's not working with her students, Anne-Marie acts and directs for professional theaters in New York and Virginia. She has also appeared in 2 independent films. Inspired by her children's theater students and her 2 sons, she has written a children's play, Have You Filled a Bucket Today?, based on the award-winning books by Carol McLeod. The adaptation, with its strong anti-bullying message and larger-than-life characters, is geared toward elementary school students. Anne-Marie is grateful for opportunities to engage in discussion around bully culture, having recently spoken on the topic to members of PFLAG and AAUW, on NCPR, and on the international television show The Big Picture with Tom Hartman. Tonight's lecture is entitled Bullying Prevention Programming in the Arts, Creative Ways to Address the Bullying Epidemic. So without further ado, welcome Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Kim. Hello, everyone. I want to say a special hello to my former students who are with us tonight. It's nice to have you back in my classroom, so to speak. Well, as you know, I'm a SLU theater professor and an actor, director, and playwright. I'm also the mother of 2, so my relationship to bullying is personal as well as professional. I should mention that our topic is very timely. I'm not sure if you've heard yet, but there was a school shooting today in Roswell, New Mexico at a middle school. I'm sure we'll hear more about it as details unfold, but this is just a reminder that what we're talking about today is very important. I have a disclaimer for you. Lecturing is my least favorite pedagogy. I teach acting, so I don't find myself doing it very often. My classes are far more interactive. And when I do lecture, I try to be as animated as possible, which you won't get the full benefit of given this mode of communication. So please bear with me. So our agenda for tonight, I'd like to outline that for you. We'll start with just a little bit about my background and how it relates to this topic. We'll talk about the origins of my play, Have You Filled the Bucket Today?, which is considered, as Kim mentioned, an anti-bullying play. We'll talk about the play's production history to give you an idea of the play's journey so far, and what I've learned about bullying prevention programming from my work on the play, which I hope will really be useful to all of you. And finally, what the applications are for you, the takeaway, if you will. And now the arts and social activism, one of our subtopics here tonight. and an aspect of theater that has played a key role in my career as a theater artist, an educator, and academic. This includes my work with children's theater. I tend to be drawn to work with a strong social message. And there's a long-standing relationship between the arts and social activism. Theater in particular has a remarkable power to affect social change. And one of my favorite subgenres of theater is theater for social change. There are other terms to describe this type of theater, but many people refer to it as theater for social change. I happen to teach a course dedicated solely to the topic here at St. Lawrence. It's one of the courses offered in our first-year program. Many of the shows that I direct fall under that category, and that's part of what I meant about discussing my background a bit. My assertion is that we can use children's theater and other arts disciplines to affect social change. In this case, to address the bullying epidemic by teaching children about bullying and how to prevent it. And I've tried to do that with playwriting in this case. I've written a play called Have You Filled a Bucket Today, which has a strong anti-bullying message. And actually, I don't prefer the term anti-bullying. I like bullying prevention better, though we tend to hear the term anti-bullying quite a bit. And the play is based on the award-winning book of the same title by Carol McLeod. And this book is taking elementary schools by storm, not just across the U.S., but abroad as well. And the play also incorporates a couple of concepts from Carol's book, Growing Up with a Bucket Full of Happiness. So the subtitle of the play includes both of her book titles. And before we go any further, I should probably explain what bucket filling is. The basic concept is that we all have an invisible bucket inside of us. And people can fill our buckets by saying and doing nice things. And then the opposite of that is true. They can dip into our buckets and take out some of those good thoughts and feelings when they say and do mean things. And of course, in turn, we can do the same thing to other people. I learned about the book through my son Trey when he was in preschool. There was an informational meeting for parents at the preschool, which is housed in our public school here in Canton. And the school guidance counselor listed the book among other character education type books. And so I checked it out and really liked it. Trey is now in elementary school in Canton at that same location. The school is called Banford Elementary. And Banford has qualified as a bucket-filling school. And they've really taken that to heart. Bucket filling has become their mantra, their philosophy, their mission. They award kids with bucket filling certificates. They sort of catch them doing well, filling others' buckets. And they have regular assemblies to recognize bucket fillers in each grade level. And it's a big deal to be recognized in that way. The kids really aspire to it. So I started to pay attention to how successful Banford was with bucket filling. And I started to notice how Trey and his friends were responding to it. And remember, Trey was just in preschool at this time, and yet he and his friends were really using the language of bucket filling. Even to solve conflicts, it was really remarkable. You know, one of the kids would hurt another kid's feelings, and the child who was hurt would say, hey, that really dipped my bucket. And the other kid would say, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it dipped your bucket. Okay, and they'd move on. And I found that remarkable, that with just a few comments using this language from the book, they were able to express their feelings, apologize for the wrongdoing, and move on, solve conflicts themselves without even involving adults. And so I thought I needed to introduce this book to my children's theater students at St. Lawrence. So here we have the St. Lawrence connection. Children's theater in the schools is a CBL course here at SLU, community-based learning. And I train my students to facilitate theater games and exercises so that my kids, my students, the big kids, can go into the local elementary school classrooms and do that work with those children. And then at the end of the semester, we invite those children to St. Lawrence to watch our students perform a children's play. So the little ones both get the experience of doing theater and then seeing the St. Lawrence theater students doing theater themselves. And my students, when I introduced the book, felt that it could help them to address what they described as cliques among the elementary school students. That was something that they were bothered by. It wasn't so much egregious acts of bucket dipping or bullying, but rather just cliques and kids feeling left out in certain situations. And they found that the book helped. They found it making a difference, and quite easily. And so I decided, after all of those experiences with the book and bucket filling, that this book was begging to be a play. And I just thought that theater would be a fitting vehicle for the message of bucket filling. Now, the book isn't set in any one particular location, and the book doesn't have any developed characters per se. The adults and the kids in the illustrations are just representations of the kinds of diverse folks that we all encounter in our communities. So I set the play to summer camp and created original characters for the play. You're looking at one on your screens now. That's Bucket Filling Fairy, who speaks in rhyme. We also have a camp counselor, Mimi, a student narrator, Trey, who's named after my older son, Professor Smarty Pants III, who is an arrogant, know-it-all professor who actually has a secret identity. He provides a lot of the adult humor in the show, and I'm often asked if I have created him in anyone's particular likeness. And I often diplomatically say, no, not any one particular person. He's a composite, if you will. But he has a little adult humor for us, though Bucket Filling Fairy tends to get the most attention. And I also added a scene and dialogue about cyberbullying, even though that's not depicted in the book, because it's such an epidemic right now. Cyberbullying does show up in Carol's book, Growing Up with a Bucket Full of Happiness, though she doesn't refer to it as cyberbullying. She refers to it as long-handled dipping, which I think is a great term, and I use both terms in the play. Now, the target audience, as Kim mentioned in the intro, this play is really directed towards elementary school students and staff, mainly because I believe we need to start at the elementary school level, at the preschool level even, and I'll talk a little bit more about why later on. Now, the play begins with Trey getting into trouble for bullying another student at camp, and the theme of the play is connected with Trey's journey. He learns about bucket filling and dipping, and he changes for the better. Now, to give you a sense of the play's journey, the production history began back in July of 2011 with a workshop production at a professional theater for youth company in Syracuse, New York, called Gifford Family Theater. That was a production in which actors had scripts in their hands. It was somewhat staged, but not fully staged. It was very low production values, not much tech. And we got a lot of feedback from the actors involved in that production, the director, and the audience afterward. I served as playwright in residence in that particular process, which was really useful to me as a playwright. And that process, that production, was followed by a fully staged production with my children's theater students, that class that I had mentioned, at SLU in December of 2011. And here you see photos of that cast. On the left, the students are performing something called the Bucket Filler's Poem that happens at the end of the play. And the strange angle there is because I was taking pictures from the side, which is where I was located during the performance. And the shot in the middle, that is of Banford Elementary's audience. We had, in addition to doing the production at St. Lawrence and inviting our community partners to see the show at St. Lawrence, we also took it to Banford so that the entire school could see it. We had been partnering with St. Mary's Parochial School, and those students came to SLU to see the show. But because Banford is a bucket filling school, we felt we couldn't leave them out. And Principal Joe McDonough decided that he wanted the entire school to see it, preschool through grade 4. And so he ended class early one day, and the entire school saw the play, which was really a treat for all of us to do that for that community of students. So that's the audience there in the middle. And then on the right, you have Bucket Filling Fairy with her white sparkly dress signing autographs. We told the students in the audience at St. Lawrence that after the show they could meet the actors and take pictures with them. And what we didn't quite expect was that the kids stormed the stage and asked for photos and autographs, and Bucket Filling Fairy was especially overwhelmed by the numbers of kids who were interested in her autograph. It was really quite nice. So after those 2 productions, I really learned a lot and revised the script as a result. And I think it's a better script because of those 2 productions. And what I love about it is that my students were involved in that process. I think that was a lot of fun for all of us. And then in December of 2012, I decided to make the script available to the public. So that's 1 year later. So I got my DBA, named my business Third Act Theater, and launched a website, which was, I thought, the best way to go about getting the word out. And when word about the play spread quickly, much more quickly than I ever could have imagined, I hired a business manager because I just couldn't keep up myself. And in our first year, we celebrated 1 year in December. The play has been produced in several states, in Canada, and in Australia. And here are some photos from the international premiere of the play, which happened at a school in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. And the photo on the left is a photo of me with the cast, which was a combination of staff members and students. So there were 3 teachers involved in that production and the assistant principal. And those kids just had a blast being on stage with teachers and a principal. And the vice principal played the role of Professor Smarty Pants. And he has a secret identity, as I mentioned. And at the end of the play, he reveals himself. He reveals the secret identity, which involves taking off a wig. And the students had quite the reaction when that happened because some of the littlest ones didn't realize who he was, who the actor was. So that was really a treat. And then the photo on the right is their bucket-filling fairy, who was the preschool teacher. And the littlest ones just loved seeing their teacher on stage. And so that was a lot of fun. I went there and served as playwright in residence on that production. And I just couldn't imagine that in such a short period of time between December and when they contacted me in April, that the play had found its way to Australia and that they wanted to produce it there. And I think that tells us that they're grappling with the same issues there on the other side of the world as we are too. Now, some productions take place in single venue locations, like the one school there in that example, while other productions tour. So for instance, in Syracuse, New York, this group, Peaceful Schools, they are a character education group. They are touring both in central New York, where they are located, and in northern New York. They take the show on the road to schools, and they've been doing this since September, and they have bookings straight through May of this year. And they are finding that they're able to spread the message of the play in great numbers because they're able to reach so many students as they take the show to various schools. And one thing that they do, and I think they do quite well, is in addition to providing the performance, they also, because they're a character education group, provide workshops. They train staff members, they train students in how to create a peaceful school environment. So that's something else that some groups are doing. Something else that we're seeing is that high schools are touring the play to the elementary schools in their district, which is a nice opportunity for the big kids to give back to the little kids, or to stick with our theme, to fill their buckets. And now this brings us back to St. Lawrence. In December of this year, 2013, last year, I worked with SLU students again on a new and improved production of the play. I was able to take what I learned from the productions I've been involved with and all of the various ones that I attended, and I only gave you a few examples. And we did another production. And you'll notice in the slide on the right, the photo on the right, the actor in the wheelchair, that's written into the script. I like to celebrate difference on stage. I think that's particularly important in children's theater. I indicate in the stage directions that the cast should be as diverse as possible. As you can tell from the photos, not all of the productions of the play have been racially or culturally diverse. In the SLU production, for example, this one, my cast was made up of the students who enrolled in the course. I didn't hold auditions. And I had 8 white students and 1 Latino student. But each group does the best that they can to represent diversity on stage. I just indicate in the stage directions that it would be ideal if the cast were as diverse as possible. We've received wonderful feedback from educators, parents, and theater folks. You'll find some testimonials from these people from various locations on the website. I'll just share one example with you of the positive feedback we've received. It's from a theater company on Long Island. They told us that they planned to do 3 performances, but they were so overwhelmed by schools that wanted to bring students to see the show that they added 14 additional performances. So they went from 3 to 17, and that was completely unexpected to them and to us. And while I'm flattered and humbled by all of this, I know that it isn't about my play. This isn't about any one piece of theater or book or work of art. This is about schools searching for ways to address bullying, creative ways in particular. But specific to the play, what we found with the various productions and tours is that the bucket filling philosophy works. It's powerful. Kids get bucket filling. They like the language and they use it. They use it to express themselves, even to solve conflicts, as I mentioned I've witnessed with my own kids. It's amazing, really. And they want to be bucket fillers. They aspire to it. I see it in my son's school. The coolest thing to be in that elementary school is a bucket filler. In particular, a bucket filler who's being recognized for being a bucket filler in those quarterly assemblies. And I think that's really remarkable. And we have to give credit to Carol McLeod. I think she really captured something special with her book, and now it's working with the play. And it's working both on stage in production and in the classroom too, because teachers are using the bucket filling and bucket dipping role play scenes in the play as classroom exercises to help teach the concept of bucket filling in a hands-on way. And this seems to work especially well with tactile kinesthetic learners. And I know from my experience, not just in the college classroom, but also in the high school classroom, because I used to teach high school English, how important it is to be able to appeal to a variety of learning styles, including the tactile kinesthetic learners. Later in the presentation, I will provide you with some online resources that include free materials for teachers and parents too, so stay tuned for that. Because of my work with the play, I've been asked to speak about bullying and bucket filling on a number of occasions. And I love doing this work, and I've learned a great deal from each of these experiences. To give you a small sense of that work, and bear with me, there's a method to my madness here. I was asked to speak at a convention of the American Association of University Women, AAUW, and a meeting of PFLAG members, parents, families, and friends of lesbians and gays. I was invited to Australia, to St. Mary MacKillop Primary School in Brisbane, to serve as playwright in residence there. I was invited to West Virginia to serve as actor and playwright in residence at Davis and Elkins College. I actually played one of my own characters in their production, which I've never done before. That was really fun. And what's interesting to me is that these organizations are all very different. They have different agendas and different missions. And yet, they're all interested in discussing the bullying epidemic. They're interested in raising awareness about it, and they're interested in doing something about the issue, because it seems strange maybe that I would be invited to speak about the same topic at all of these different organizations. And then as far as the media goes, I was asked to do a series of 3 radio interviews for NCPR, which is North Country Public Radio, 2 of which focused on the international premiere in Australia and my work there. And then the big picture with Tom Hartman, I was invited to do a guest spot on that show in October, because October is National Bullying Prevention Month. And that ended up being especially timely, unfortunately, because of the suicide of Rebecca Ann Sedgwick, who was the 12-year-old girl from Florida who committed suicide in October. And that happened right before I went on the air to do that show. In fact, I'd already been booked on the show before that happened. And then just as I was going on the show, we had heard the news about her death. And I think her tragic death is a reminder of how grave the bullying problem is. Many young people are taking their own lives because they feel that the only way they can escape the bullying problem that they're facing is to take their own lives. So I don't think that we can, take it, we can't take it too seriously. It's a very, very serious issue. And I don't want to be alarmist about it, but it is a bully culture that we're facing, and we need to really help our young people because they're being harassed, they're being bullied, and they often don't know how to deal with it. And so I think what this all tells us, why all of these different organizations want to address this issue, is that the bullying problem isn't particular to any one school or community or culture. It's an epidemic. I mean, I'm using that word very deliberately. If we had more time, we could discuss what some might refer to as our global bully culture. Our global bully culture, which is a potential cause, one of many potential causes of this problem facing our young people. But that's not really our focus here tonight. I think the point is that teachers and administrators and counselors and parents are struggling to find effective solutions to address bullying and to help those who are being bullied. Some have told me that they're absolutely desperate to find something that will work. And clearly other people and organizations want to help, people outside of the school system. They want to raise awareness and they want to do something. So what next? Well, what may have worked in the past simply isn't working anymore, and I think we need to accept that. The approach of having an assembly at the beginning of the school year in which a school official speaks about bullying isn't working. It's a method that may have worked at one point, but needs to be updated now. We just must address the bullying epidemic in new and creative ways. So I've come up with what I hope will be a useful list of goals for you, goals for bullying prevention programming. The first is to be more creative about it. This is where the arts come in. The next is to use more than one mode of communication. Again, the arts. So a song, a play, a poem can communicate the message of bucket filling or whatever particular anti-bullying message you want to communicate, because it doesn't have to be bucket filling. Also the internet, TV, we can use those modes too if we find good programming there, and we know that kids respond well to screen time whether we like it or not. And to use more than one voice. I think repetition is really important. If kids are hearing these positive messages from their principal and their teachers and their counselors and their parents and guest artists who come to school and guest speakers who come to school and their child care providers and their tutors, if they're hearing it everywhere, we just have a better chance of that message hitting home, sinking in. Another suggestion that I have is to use voices that are not traditionally seen as authoritative. College students, for instance. I have seen this firsthand when I go into those elementary school classrooms and I watch my students working with the children. I see how those kids look at my students with total adoration. It's as if they are superstars. And whatever they say seems to be really, really exciting to those kids. So college students, they're not traditionally seen as authoritative. So let's use them, for example, as new voices. Fairies who speak in rhyme are not traditionally viewed as authoritative in the case of my play. And another goal that I think we should have for ourselves is to start young, as early as the preschool level. We know we have a problem at the middle school level, but we can't wait until then to address it. I think we need to be proactive instead of reactive. Let's empower kids with the language and the tools they need from a very young age. I will add that we need to pay special attention to cyberbullying. I read an article a few months ago that has really stayed with me. It was about cyberbullying in particular, and the reporter had interviewed middle school students and asked about cyberbullying and how it affects them on a day-to-day basis. And this young girl said, and I thought she put this so effectively, she was really quite articulate. She said, if cyberbullying didn't exist, I might be bullied during the school day, and that would be awful. But at the end of the day, I would get a break from it. I would go home, I might forget about it, feel happy, regroup, get some rest, be with my friends and my family, the people who love me, and then I'd go back, and I might have to face the bullying again, but then again I get my break. But with cyberbullying, there is no break. You can never escape it. It's at school, it's on your phone, it's on your computer. She said, in addition to that, everybody knows you're being bullied. And that really hit home for me because I think about when I was a kid, if you were being bullied, it's very possible that not everybody knew about it. You know, the bully might harass you in the hallway and maybe a couple of kids noticed it. Or the bully wrote you a note that was particularly hurtful, but you're the only one who saw it. But this student is pointing out that it follows them everywhere, and everybody knows about it, or at least that's the perception that the person being bullied has, that everybody sees it, everybody knows about it. So cyberbullying is playing a big role in the bullying epidemic for sure. And something else that I think we need to think about is the bully, him or herself. I think we'd be remiss to focus on helping only the victims of bullying. Clearly the bullies are hurting too, and they need help. Now, dealing with the psychology behind one's bullying or bucket-dipping behaviors is not my area of expertise, nor is it the focus of this lecture, but it is something to consider, and I just felt I'd be remiss not to mention it. I think another thing to keep in mind is that we need to own this problem as a community. Teaching kids about bullying is not just the responsibility of teachers or counselors or principals. So kudos to you for registering for this webinar if you do not find yourself in that group of school officials, because it really is about all of us. I think a great example of owning the problem as a community comes to us from St. Mary MacKillop Primary School in Queensland, Australia. I was so impressed with that community. So they mounted a production of the play, and they told me that they really wanted it to be a community celebration. It wasn't just a performance to them. It was a community celebration of this philosophy of bucket filling, of treating others with kindness and compassion, and sending a message that we will care for each other in this environment, that this is a place of kindness and respect. And I really got that impression. One really funny story about their event is that I had been emailing back and forth with them for weeks and weeks before I went. And the guidance counselor with whom I was communicating said at one point, "We're so excited about your coming, and we're making all of these plans, and we will really roll out the red carpet for you." And I assumed that that was metaphorical, but it was actually literal. They literally had a red carpet at the event. And of course, it wasn't just for me. It was for everybody. When you entered the auditorium for the performance, you walked down a red carpet, and they had older students playing paparazzi who took your photo, many of them, so it had a paparazzi type effect. And the red carpet was lined with silver railings from which hung buckets. And so right from the start, it felt very special. And in addition to that, after the performance, there was a tea, which of course is an Australian custom. There was tea, and everybody who attended, adults, were invited to that tea to talk with me, to talk with each other, and it was a feeling of a celebration. It really was. And then once the adults left, those from outside of the school went home, I had a chance to speak with all of the students. They divided the group into two. The younger students met with me, and then the older students met with me. And it ended up being an entire day-long event. And the overall feeling about it was that the entire community was involved. It wasn't just a performance. It really was a celebration. And in talking with the kids throughout the course of that day, they absolutely got the message that everybody cared about them, both the people at the school and those who came from outside the community to see the performance and to have tea, and that everybody believed in the mission, in the bucket filling philosophy. Everybody believed in the importance of sending the message that we're all going to care for each other. We're not going to allow bullying to take place in this environment. And I think we can all learn from that. I was really quite moved by the way that they handled the entire event. So, bullying prevention programming and the arts. I want to say a little bit about the studies here. They show that children respond positively to the arts, and that participation in the arts provides children with both cognitive and affective benefits. And that's not just theater. Music, dance, fine arts, creative writing. It's sad then, of course, that the arts are often the first programs cut in a harsh economic time, but I won't get started on that. The arts can help us to achieve the aforementioned goals. Now, for teachers and school administrators, I want to be specific here. You can incorporate the arts into your classroom yourself, but of course some people are more comfortable with this than others. So if you're not comfortable, you could hire a performing arts group to visit your school or class. Some schools are doing this really, really well. They're bringing in all sorts of groups, again, not just theater. One example is the Peaceful Schools Tour that I told you about. And that is not just a performance, but again, the performance coupled with these workshops about character education and how to create a peaceful school environment. Another possibility is to partner with a high school or college student group. I mentioned the SLU course. You know, high school and college students really are considered cool by these younger students. You can say something till you're blue in the face and it goes in one ear and out the other, but then some big kid, high school kid or college kid says it, and all of a sudden it's the most amazing thing that anyone's ever heard. Now, high school and college instructors and club advisors are looking for service learning and community service opportunities for their students. Why not take advantage of that? Why not create a kind of program where everybody is benefiting? The high school and college students are getting that kind of service learning or community service opportunity, which we know will serve them well. It might also help them with their college applications. I suppose that doesn't hurt either. And then, of course, the younger kids have the opportunity of working with the older kids and learning about, say, bucket filling or bullying prevention programming of some other kind, and everybody wins. And this kind of programming is free. So it's another possibility for us. Now, for parents, I suggest that you let your child's teacher, principal, guidance counselor, and parent organization know how important bullying prevention programming is to you as a parent. Send the message that our children are worth the investment in this type of programming. I understand that times are tough, money is tight, but some schools have some money. There is some money, and it isn't all earmarked and spent before it's spent. You know, sometimes there is a pocket of money that schools have some say over how it's spent, and maybe this is a way that it can be spent. You just have to send the message about it. Again, let's be proactive so that maybe we don't have the need to be reactive all the time, so that we don't need to be in crisis management mode all the time. And in terms of the money being earmarked, I have found, and again, I started out in a public high school, that if you come up with an idea for how money can be spent at the beginning of the school year, you are much more likely to see that happen than if you come up with the idea, of course, in May or June, because at that point often the money is spent. So we could be thinking ahead maybe to next school year, and that gives us some planning time. So bullying prevention programming at home, because again, if we hear the same message at home and at school and in daycare, I think that will serve the kids. We can teach our kids about bucket filling and bucket dipping. We can use the language at home. I will warn you, though, this can sometimes come back to haunt you. I have a 4-year-old, just turned 4, who likes to say, "You really dipped my bucket when you put me in timeout." So consider yourselves forewarned about that. Another idea is that you can hang a bucket filling and dipping chart, which helps kids to see a visual. They can become more aware of their actions and how they affect others. I'll tell you, in my house, I have 2 sons, ages 8, almost 8, and 4, and we have 2 small whiteboards that hang on our fridge, and we keep track of bucket filling and bucket dipping with check marks. And currently, we are focusing on the boys' treatment of each other. So ours happen to be very specific right now, sadly very telling about how they're treating each other. I think they often treat others a little bit better than they treat each other. But again, it's a visual that makes them more aware of their actions, and I find it's actually quite effective. Another idea is to decorate a bucket filler's bucket. Kids tend to like decorating things. Get a bucket, decorate it, use some arts and crafts supplies, and make it your bucket for 2014. And everybody in the family can write down examples of bucket filling that they see happening at home, so catch your kids doing well. Put the examples in the bucket, and then at the end of the year, you can read through all of the examples and sort of celebrate all the examples of bucket filling that happen throughout the year. It's a great way to sort of end the year, and then, of course, create a new one for the following year. Now, we're going to switch gears a little bit here and get legal for a moment. Some federal laws address certain types of harassment. So, for example, as an adult in the workplace, There are laws that protect you if you are being harassed, but there is no comprehensive law to address bullying and harassment in schools. So adults are protected in a way that kids are not. However, the Safe Schools Improvement Act would fill that gap in federal education policy. It was referred to Senate committee, I want to say back in February, so going on a year almost. As far as I know, it is still sitting in committee. So what can we do about this particular aspect of the problem? We can urge our senators to vote for the act. That would at least give schools a very clear way to act. Because in talking with school officials, I have found that often they're unsure how to act. You know, what do we do about a bully? And that problem is often made more complicated by parents who say, okay, my kid says that she's being bullied, but she doesn't really want us to do anything about it. She wants us to be aware of it, but she doesn't really want us to do anything about it. That comes up a lot when we have talkbacks following performances of the play, and we have panels, and on those panels we have, you know, a local guidance counselor and principal and teacher. I sit on the committee. We have local professors in the education department and psychology department joining us. And this comes up a lot. So my kid's being bullied, but she doesn't want us to do anything about it. Or my son was accused of bullying, but we don't think the punishment was fair. And often we hear that the schools are just at a loss as to how to handle it. So if the Safe Schools Improvement Act were passed, it would sort of regulate how this all were being handled. So that's something that we can consider getting behind if we so choose. So potential applications, I'd like us to think about this. If this were a conference, I'd probably suggest a group brainstorming session, but given the communication mode here, we'll do things a little bit differently. So WIFM, that stands for What's in It for Me. I teach my students that when they give a speech or a presentation, their audience may be wondering, what's in it for me? And as a speaker, they must make that clear throughout the course of the presentation. I hope that I've done that. We stated in the description of this lecture that it would be ideal for parents and educators. And I hope that I've given you some ideas and some things to ponder, as well as some practical applications. Of course, I don't have a magical formula for you. Nobody does. If we did, then of course there'd be no reason to even have this conversation, and we could solve the problem so very easily. But I do hope that I've given you some things to think about. If we happen to also have some children's theater folks in the audience, hopefully you're energized about using theater to eliminate this particular issue. Now for some additional information, because it would be great if you were able to get some more out of this presentation once we all say goodbye, there are some takeaways here. I've provided my web address and where to find us on Facebook, but I've also provided Carol McLeod's website. Her organization, Bucket Fillers Incorporated, is fantastic. You can download free bucket filling lesson plans for both elementary school and middle school, and you can sign up for her free e-newsletter at the site. And I get her e-newsletter, and I get fairly regular, but not too regular, emails from them with tips. They focus their e-newsletter very specifically so that each time you get one, it has a focus, and they're never too long. They get to the point, and they're always useful. And I find this resource very invaluable, both for parents and for teachers. And frankly, there's really something in there for anybody who's concerned about this issue. So I really, really do recommend her site. Now, if you're interested, you can purchase copies of the play and Carol McLeod's book on my website. And as a thank you for participating tonight, I'd like to offer you a discount on the play if you'd like to read it or direct it or use it in your classroom. The coupon code is here on the slide for you. And if you end up reading, using the play, I would love to hear your feedback. At any time, I will get you my SLU address and my bucket filling play address so that you have both. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have after tonight. And in a moment, we're going to have some time for questions and comments now, so we can do that. But Beyond that, you are free to email me, and I'd be happy to respond to questions after we're done tonight.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anne-Marie. What we'd like to do now is take any questions or comments from the group. Just to go over again the directions for how to ask a question if you missed that at the beginning. At the top of your navigation screen to the left, you should see an icon with a small hand. If you have a question or comment, simply click on the hand. We will see that next to your name here, and we'll call on you. At that point, we'll unmute you, and you will have the ability to ask Anne-Marie your question. Just look through the list of participants, see if we have any comments or questions. And again, just a reminder that if you do have a question and you're using your computer, you just need to make sure that you have an external microphone turned on, and if you're using your telephone audio and you're using your speakerphone, to just make sure that you probably will need to pick up your handset at that point if you have a question or comment to ask. Still just scrolling through the participants. There's got to be some questions or comments out there. I'll also go ahead and turn on the ability to type in your question. So if you are feeling like you don't want to ask your question aloud but want to type a question or comment in, you should be able to see that in your navigation pane at this point. If you'd like to type something in, we'd also be happy to take your question that way as well. Okay, actually we have a technical question about when the recording will be up. So we do record all of our Laurentian lectures, and it usually takes about a week after the lecture for us to work with our IT department to have that recording available online. And at that point, we will send a link to all participants so that you'll have the opportunity to re-listen to tonight's lecture and to see the PowerPoint presentation. So you can expect that in about a week. Okay, just going to take a look through the list one more time and see if there are any comments or questions. Okay, we do have one question here from Doreen. It says, what things can a primary teacher do daily? It says, what things can a primary teacher do daily in his or her question? So I'm assuming in his or her classroom, probably to address this.
I would say there are a number of possibilities, Doreen. Thanks for your question. I would say to start with, I would introduce the philosophy and the book if you haven't already. I would consider using the bucket filling and bucket dipping scenes in class. That wouldn't be every day, but maybe once, to get the kids on their feet and acting out the different scenarios and then responding. One of the things that we do in the play that you can also do in the classroom is to have the kids act out the scene and then answer for you, was that an example of bucket filling or bucket dipping? And then particularly if it's bucket dipping, how do you think that felt? So getting kids to really express the feelings that they would have if they were in that situation. or for the quote-unquote actor in the situation, how did it feel to you when so-and-so did that in that scene to you? We know it wasn't real. You were just playing a character, but how did that feel? So that's one suggestion. Another possibility is to have a bucket-filling goal box in class. That's something that is mentioned in the play, where kids can think about their goal. What's your bucket-filling goal today? Have them think about that. And then they can write it in the goal box in your classroom, and then you can read those aloud. And they can be anonymous, or you can have the kids write their names. That's entirely up to you. And then you can read those aloud, and then the kids can hear all of these different ideas, not just their own, but their classmates, to just encourage the thinking about the things that we can do to be bucket fillers on a regular basis. And you could specify, what can we do to be bucket fillers in the classroom, or what can we do to be bucket fillers at home. One thing that I want to point out, when I talk to kids and ask them for examples of bucket dipping, what I always hear is that bucket dipping happens in the cafeteria, on the playground, and on the bus, which of course stands to reason, because those are the places where kids outnumber the adults by quite a bit. So if you wanted to specify those bucket filling goals, you know, what would you do to fill somebody's bucket on the playground, at recess, in the cafeteria? So those are some possibilities. The other thing is, again, catch kids doing well. You know, you could maybe take note of the bucket filling examples that you noticed and then share those with the kids. You could decorate bucket filling buckets. You know, each kid could create a bucket for themselves, and that's a reminder. Just some ideas off the top of my head.
All right, it looks like we have another question from Lauren LaValle. Lauren writes, considering much of this is really effective with elementary age students, have you had any experience adapting the language for middle school?
Yeah, I would say I'm in the beginning stages of writing a play for middle schoolers, actually. And one of the reasons for that, Lauren, is that I don't think this language is terribly appropriate for middle school. I think it's ideal for elementary school, which is not to say that it can't work in middle school, but Carol's book and my play are absolutely targeted to elementary school. Carol would say that it can be adapted, I think, to middle school. I haven't personally had that experience. I would recommend going to Carol's website because she has a lot of materials for middle schoolers there. And she's taking her basic concept and just adjusting it, basically, for older kids. Because at the heart of this is concept of compassion. I consider it a modern take on the golden rule. Again, I think the language works best for elementary school kids, but the concept even works for adults. Carol McLeod and her team at Bucket Fillers Incorporated, they even do corporate training. So obviously they're taking the concept and they're making it age appropriate and you know, site specific for a workplace environment. So I don't personally have experience with this language working for middle schoolers, but Carol does, and I would go to her website.
Looks like we have another question from Kenneth Downs. Kenneth said, you've indicated that bullying is an epidemic that seems to be universal. Is there any research to indicate that bullying is more prevalent in poorer communities where adverse childhood experiences or trauma are more common?
I haven't seen that research, which is not to say that it doesn't exist. I have not seen that. But I was on a panel with a psychology professor from Davis and Elkins College when I was there in November. And somewhat related to your question, he was talking about the causes of bullying behaviors. Because like I mentioned, you know, we'd be remiss not to look at the bullies and what's going on there. And he was talking about one of the reasons that people do engage in bullying behaviors, and absolutely something that tends to come up a lot, is childhood trauma. Whether or not that is linked to socioeconomic status, he didn't get into, and again, I haven't personally seen that research, but you're hitting on something that I think is key. The childhood trauma can play a role, and certainly in general, somebody's psychological, you know, state. Something is going on there. Kids are generally unhappy, and we know that, and this is in Carol's book actually, that bullies think they can fill their own buckets by dipping into somebody else's, but that never works. I think that's verbatim from her book, actually. And that means, of course, that somebody is lacking something. There's a certain insecurity or a lacking. And so your question is a great one. I'm sorry I can't answer it more specifically, but there certainly is an important childhood trauma question there. I think there is a link.
Great. Any other questions or comments? I think we have time for at least a few more. If there are others out there, again, you have the ability to raise your hand virtually, or if you feel more comfortable typing in your question, we'll check the log again if there are any additional comments or questions. Okay, we do have another comment. It says, I completely agree that this messaging should start as early as possible. I work in the domestic and sexual violence movement, and the links between bullying behavior and battering, sexual harassment, etc. are growing. The messages about promoting positive, respectful behavior is applicable to each issue.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that actually is connected to the last question, that often students who are bullies who experience trauma, which could be related to sexual abuse, often act out in certain ways, and that can show up in children, of course, in the school environment or at home. And I think what you're suggesting here is that this can be applicable not just in a school environment, but in the kind of work that you are doing. Absolutely. Again, this concept can be applicable in all sorts of environments, and we can adjust the language to make it suitable, but it can work for all sorts of people in all sorts of environments. And I should mention that the concept of bucket filling and bucket dipping is not Carol's concept, Carol McLeod's concept. I'm using Carol because I know her personally now. It actually is credited to a man named Dr. Donald Clifton, who is known as the father of strength psychology, and he came up with the term in the 60s or 70s, and Carol McLeod has to give credit to him in her books. I have given credit to him in my script as well. So he came up with the concept. Carol McLeod learned about it in an early childhood education conference, actually, and she was learning about, I think initially caring for infants actually is how the concept was being used, and it was being applied to early childhood education, and she thought, gosh, this could be used really well in an elementary school environment. So again, there's so many applications. This concept was not initially being used in a bullying context, but now it's working very well in that context, and I think there are all sorts of other applications, so I agree completely.
We have another question from Tiffany Zook. Tiffany asks, did you have any roadblocks along the way, and how did you overcome them in your creative process?
Sure. The first one, I don't know if I'd call it a roadblock, but it's an interesting story maybe. When I was first working on Bucket Filling Fairy, I wrote a couple of rhymes for her. She was speaking in prose initially, and I wrote a couple of rhymes, and I loved them. I had fun writing them. I thought they were flowing beautifully. I thought they worked for the character, and so I went back and I erased everything that she said, and I was almost done with the play at that point. I erased everything and I started over and I wrote everything in rhyme. And I use that story a lot in the classroom to teach my students that you should never fall in love with your own work because I just realized it just wasn't as good as it could be, and I started over, and I think having her rhyme has made all the difference in that character. Another example is when the play initially was in workshop form, it did not take place in a summer camp. It was in a classroom. And ultimately, working with various artists and getting feedback from all sorts of people, I decided, and again, this came from other people too, it wasn't just me, that it would be much more playful in a summer camp environment, in part because we knew that this play would be seen in a lot of school environments. And wouldn't it be more fun if kids were leaving the class and going to see a show that didn't take place in a classroom, if they could have a little bit of escapism and get an educational message, but in a place that wasn't a school. So they leave the classroom to go to a summer camp for 45 minutes. And that is, by the way, the running time of the play. So a couple of roadblocks, and I think the lesson here is to not fall in love with your own work and to be open to other people's suggestions, because I've had some great ones along the way, and I've taken them, and the play is better for it.
And then we have a comment from Tammy Lemmer that just says, thank you for promoting creative ways of addressing the issues. We've begun to call this approach edutainment.
Oh, I love that. Was that Tammy, did you say, Kim? Tammy, I hope you'll be okay with my stealing that. I think that's fantastic. I love that. I do think that kids respond to creative approaches. Kids are fiercely creative by nature. I see this in my acting classes. At some point along the way, we are told by society, or at least we are given the message somehow, that we should beat out every creative bone in our bodies. We should forget that we are creative beings. We should be serious. We should take life seriously. We've got a to-do list, and we need to check every item off of it by Friday. And as a result, we lose that sense of creativity, that sense of wonder about the world. And when we allow kids to tap back into that, they love it, and they appreciate it, and they get the message that we're trying to send to them. And the studies absolutely back that up. Kids absolutely respond to the arts in a very positive way, and they do get both cognitive and affective benefits from participation in the arts in particular, but even just attending artistic events.
We'll take just one final look and see if there are any last comments or questions from the audience.
No, I will. If we don't have any other questions, I just want to thank everybody for being with us. I appreciate your questions. I appreciate your time. And since it will be about a week until you receive the PowerPoint presentation and the lecture, if you want to review it again, I just want to let you know about that coupon code that we've set up for you. I can't take any credit at all. My business manager has set this up. So if you have technical problems, don't blame me. You can contact us at the website, but we should be good to go. It is bucketfillingplay.com. That's the website. And the coupon code that you would be entering at checkout is SLU Lecture, all capital letters, SLU Lecture, all one word. And you can do this through this Friday, January 17th, and you get 25% off the purchase of the script at bucketfillingplay.com. And again, you can reach me at the website there or at my St. Lawrence address. I'd be happy to answer additional questions or to hear your feedback about the play. Again, I think the play is better because I've taken feedback from other people, and I'm always open to it.
Great. Well, special thank you to Anne-Marie for leading tonight's lecture. Thank you to all of you for participating. I just wanted to let you know that right after the webinar tonight, you will receive a link to a brief survey, and I hope that you'll take a moment to answer the questions, as your feedback will help shape future lectures. So thank you so much again, and have a good night, everyone.
Thanks.